The last song that we just sang, Can He Depend on You, deals with the question as to our subject, as to, you might change that word, can he depend on you, is are you going to be loyal to him? That's what it's asking, and our subject is, of course, on loyalty. In that song that we sang before that, Jesus is all the world to me, if you noted the third verse and the third line of that, following him, I know I'm right, he watches, the second line instead of the third one, oh, how could I this friend deny when he's so true to me? That's talking about loyalty. I will be loyal to him. And yes, he's showing the reason is because of what he has done to us. But loyalty is something that is vital to the Christian. The Bible is filled with the aspect and the teaching of loyalty. And we have been noticing that one needs to be loyal to his convictions, and specifically dealing with the doctrine that we find with being taught within the Scriptures. But also, we began noticing this aspect last Sunday afternoon. We need to be loyal to that aspect dealing with morality, and how that those things that are practiced today and advocated by so many today, fornication, adultery, homosexuality being an alternate lifestyle, and things such as that are simply works of the flesh that are wrong and sinful, and we need to be loyal to the principles that God has set forth. Another aspect in conjunction with that is that of dancing. Years ago, just about every religious group was opposed to dancing and the dance. Now then, you don't see that anymore. Instead, you have religious groups organizing dances for their kids in particular. And yet it's still classified as lasciviousness by the definition of the word in Galatians 5:19, which is a work of the flesh. The indecent bodily movements and unchaste handling of males and females. That's the definition as given by Thayer of lasciviousness. And thus, we need to be faithful and loyal to showing people that dancing is wrong, it's sinful, and that we are going to remain opposed to it and not allow and encourage these things. And it starts at a very young age as well. I remember talking to someone allowing their young children to go to a dance. All they did was move around a little bit anyway. It taught them a lesson, though. Taught them the lesson dealing with it's all right to dance. So it starts at a young age. Young people, as they get to that time in which they're going to graduate, there's going to be that prom, and we certainly don't want to deny them the opportunity to attending their prom. But it's dancing that's involved in that, and thus sinful. We need to remain loyal to the principles of Christianity and morality, that we're not going to endorse these things. No matter how many religious groups, how many people, and even how many so-called Christians will engage in it. But also, the clothing that we wear. We need to be modest. In 1 Timothy 2, verse 9 and verse 10, Paul says that in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with broided hair or gold or pearl or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. The clothing that we wear is to be, as described here, modest, with shamefacedness. Some don't understand that word in reality. It is that we dress in such a way that will not cause us shame. If you go back in the Old Testament, you see on a regular basis the Old Testament setting forth a principle that the dress tells you what a person is. There was the harlot and those individuals who would dress as a harlot or as a prostitute. That was their business, and you knew that was their business by the way in which they dressed. Proverbs talks about that a great deal. How that the woman who is a prostitute, she's there enticing by the clothes in which she wears. It's important as to what we present ourselves to be by the way in which we clothe ourselves. When you also go back into the Old Testament and you start seeing from the very beginning of time what God considered naked. Here Adam and Eve ate of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they realized they were naked, and what they did was make sewed fig leaves together to try to cover their private area. And yet, even with that area covered, they recognized, as well as God, that they were still naked. And so they hid from God, saying, "We were naked." Well, God said, "Who told you you were naked?" But they had sewed fig leaves together to cover those certain areas of the physical body, and yet they were still naked. And so God clothed them. But when we look at the idea that is presented by God in that, as to what God did to cover their nakedness, it was to cover from the shoulders to the knees. And he is setting forth the principle thus, when you start uncovering that area that he had covered of the physical body, you're naked. When the priests were given the clothing to wear in service to God, and let's just get this out of the way as well. Modesty, as far as clothing is concerned, addresses men as well as women. God didn't just clothe Eve and leave Adam alone. He clothed both of them. The priests were men, and yet he put them, because at times they would be going up steps, and so that people would not be able to see their nakedness, they made breeches for them, even though they would be wearing an outer robe, so that nobody could see their nakedness. And those breeches went down to the knees. God was again setting forth, here's the principle of nakedness. But that was with men. I know of brethren who through the years have said, modesty only applies to women. That men can't dress immodestly. Well, then why did God cover Adam? Why did God set forth a clothing for the priest that covered their nakedness? It applies to both. We need to be loyal to what God's standard is in relationship to our clothing. Now, we live in an area out, close to the beach, in which people parade their nakedness all the time. they wouldn't appreciate being described that way, but they do, as far as God's standard. And they think nothing about it because they have on a bathing suit or swimming suit. Yet, by God's standard, in reality, what Adam and Eve put on and sewed together might have covered more than the modern day bathing suit. They recognized they were naked. Maybe we need some more of that fruit of the knowledge of good and evil so that people today will recognize their nakedness. You can't help but walking down, if you go to the mall or some other place, and the clothing that some individuals wear, and that's men and women, are designed to appeal to the opposite sex in such a way that it is drawing attention to their physical body. If for no other reason, we should respect ourselves enough to say, I'm not an object. You should not objectify me. And we do that by the clothing in which we wear. These young guys today who wear their pants, in fact, they've got to hold it up with one arm or one hand while they're walking around because they're down to their ankles if they don't, need to be ashamed of themselves. They need to learn and they need to be taught modesty. We need to dress in such a way that it exhibits godliness. Hollywood is not the standard, nor are the recording artists today our standard, no matter where they might be, whether Nashville or Hollywood or New York or any place else. The fashion industry, whether it be in Paris or London or any other place, isn't our standard. God is the standard that we go by. And we need to realize that as we clothe ourselves, so that we will clothe ourselves in such a way as will present someone who is godly to the world. But also we need to be loyal regarding a speech. The speech of our world today and our society has gone into the gutter. It is corrupt, vile, evil. In Ephesians 4th chapter and verse 25 says, "Wherefore put away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." And then in verses later, verse 31, he says, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice." We are not to allow corrupt communication, Paul says in Colossians, to proceed out of our mouth. And yet, we have language today that we hear on a regular basis, and sadly it starts infecting us. While it's not taking the Lord's name in vain, it is just vile language. It is corrupt communication. It's language that we can't even mention because it's wrong, it's sinful. And yet, through the years, it has become something that is commonplace within our society. It's almost as if it's expected. And you emphasize points not by the use of proper words, by using some explicative. And that's how we're going to emphasize something. We need to be speaking truth, speaking that which is edifying, not things which take us down into the gutter. But also, he says there in Ephesians 4, speak every man truth and put away lying. Lying is a big problem within our society. we don't think anything about it almost. If we tell a little white lie, that would have to be all right. Anyway, it might be for a good cause. It might be to avoid a bunch of hassle. And so we tell a little white lie. No, it's lying. All liars, John wrote, both in Revelation 21 and 22, shall have their part in the lake of fire. That's not some liars. That's not just the liars who tell big whoppers. That's all liars. Doesn't matter what it is. If you lie, well, the old statement, if you lie, you fry. That's the principle that God has set forth. God is truth. All lies find their origin in Satan. Go back to John, the 8th chapter sometime, and notice that aspect. The year of your father, the devil, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a liar from the beginning, but not in the truth, for there is no truth in him. He's a liar. He's a murderer. From the beginning, he lied. That's the nature of Satan. And when we lie, we're taking on the nature of Satan instead of the nature of God. It doesn't matter how big or how widespread or anything else it might be. When we lie, we are taking on Satan's nature instead of God's. God's nature is that of truth. He cannot lie. That's what's stated in both Titus chapter 1 and verse 2 and Hebrews the 6th chapter. That God cannot lie. Now sometimes just for fun we ask individuals, can God do anything? And invariably some individuals who want to be thought smart, no, he can't do anything. There are some things that God cannot do. It is impossible for God to lie. Why? Because it is contrary to his nature. Well, if God is truth and he cannot lie, it's impossibility for him to lie, then when we lie, we're contrary to his nature. We need to be known as individuals who speak the truth and only the truth and always the truth. But then we also have the problem in our day of drinking alcoholic beverages. And it is a problem in our society. Social drinking, as it's called. Really, it should not be called social drinking because it's anything but social. It is sin. The drinking of alcoholic beverages is simply not authorized by God as far as drinking it as a beverage. Now then, understand, we're excluding in that discussion medication. It is authorized for the use of medication. That's the whole point in 1 Timothy the 5th chapter when Paul told Timothy, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. What's he saying? You have infirmities, and the wine, you need to take that wine for medicinal purposes. But he's not authorizing us for drinking alcoholic beverages as a beverage, whether it be social or any other way you want to view it. In fact, what that proves is that Timothy refused to drink alcoholic beverages. If he was normally one who would drink alcoholic beverages, then why did Paul have to tell him to do it? Give him a command from God, you drink this for your stomach's sake and your off infirmities. He would have already been doing it. There would have been no need to state it. It proves that Timothy refused to drink any alcohol. as far as a beverage is concerned, because it takes command to get him to do it from a medicinal standpoint. In Ephesians 5:18, we're told that we are not to be drunk with wine, but the word that's used there, by the very nature of the word itself, and I'm not going to go into the Greek details, but it's called an inceptive verb. There's a reason for that, or incohative verb is another phrase that it means the same thing. And that means you do not start the process. You do not start being drunk with wine. The way in which you start a process is the beginning point of it. The beginning point of being drunk is taking alcohol or drinking alcohol. And so he is commanding, you do not start the process of being drunk with wine. You do not take the first drink even. Solomon in Proverbs tells them, don't even look upon the wine when it's red. And yet some will say, oh, well, we can drink it anyway. No, it's wrong. We have gambling today within a big problem within our society, becoming bigger all the time, because our states have decided this is a good way in which to make money. Except they don't call it gambling, they call it the lottery. And you can't go to just about any, some grocery stores you can't, but any of these mini marts and get gas without having, here's all of these long lines of people buying lottery tickets. And yet it's sinful. It's evil, it's gambling. Very simply put, God never authorized man to gain or obtain money in that way. Then you start looking at all of the principles which it violates. Principle of love. Principle of honesty. And there's so many principles that gambling violates. But the very basic principle is really God didn't authorize it. God did not authorize us to make money or obtain money in that way. And thus it's wrong. But our society has accepted it. Now, will we be loyal to God, or will we make compromises with our society? Now then, I guarantee you, most in the religious world even don't care about that type of teaching. They've succumbed, they see no problem with it. And so you'll see those who claim to be religious going and buying the lottery tickets. When I'm asked, I tell them I don't sin. You know, there's ways in which we can teach lessons to people. They might not appreciate it, but at least they'll know where we stand, and they'll know the action that they're engaging is wrong. By the way in which we talk about things and the way in which we answer questions. How many times here's all of this money that you can win. Are you going to buy a lottery ticket? Are you going to engage in the Powerball and this one or that one? Or I won this amount of money. I wonder how much money they spent in order to win that little amount. Because in reality, gambling is designed for you to lose money. That's all it is. It's to lose your money. For them to take your money, gamble. That's the design of it. But there very simply is no authority for it. In the long ago, Joseph was carried off into, it was really captivity, taken to Egypt. And he was in Potiphar's house as a slave. But he worked his way up until where Potiphar presented to him, basically, he was the ruler of the house, had control over everything within the house. But there came a time, it says that his master's wife, Potiphar's wife, cast her eyes upon Joseph. And she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said unto his master's wife, "My master wotteth not what is with me in the house." That is, does not know what is with me in the house. "And he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" It would have been very easy for Joseph to reason in his mind, well, nobody will know about it. And then later on, verse 12, it says that after she continues with this, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." Again, it would have been very easy. Nobody's around. Nobody will see it. Nobody will know. And so why don't I go ahead and do it? And that way it'll just solve all the problems. She won't be hassling me anymore. But his response at that point in time was that he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Those areas, those things that are sinful, we need to flee from. It's a good principle that we learn from Joseph in this, that here is a situation that is sinful. We need to get out. We need to flee. Get away from it. However it takes, just leave. Now then, it appeared to go rather badly for him as a result of him fleeing, didn't it? She tells her husband, and he throws him into the prison. Now we all know the end of the story, but even though it cost him his place, even though it cost him his freedom they had, even though he was a slave, he was rather, if I can use the term, uppity slave. In other words, he wasn't treated as a common slave. He was the ruler of the house, everything in the house under his control. He lost all of that, and he was put in a prison. But he still would not sin against God. Daniel is another great illustration for us. If you recall, here's Israel, or the southern kingdom of Judah, and they're rebelling against God. And so Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire, his armies, come down and they take Jerusalem. That's in 606 BC. When they take Jerusalem and conquer it, they left most of the people there. But some of the choicest young men they took with them back to Babylon. Left others. Put in basically a vassal king that was going to be subject to Nebuchadnezzar. But among those that went back or was taken at that time were Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Those 4 young men. When they're taken back, they're put into the control of an individual. And his responsibility was to basically fatten them up, make them appear in such a way that they would be able to be servants to the king. And doing this, they would be feeding them food and drink that was not appropriate for a Jew to be engaged in. And it says in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, "But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself." Now Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were there with him, and they also refused to defile themselves. But it's here speaking specifically about Daniel. But all four of them. Now, the prince of the eunuch, or the ruler of the eunuchs, he wasn't too gung-ho about this. If I should allow you not to eat this food or drink these things, and you don't appear in a good way and to the king, he'll come and he'll put me to death. My life's on the line. He wasn't too happy about this request. So Daniel worked it out with him, but Daniel, notice that, purposed in his heart. There's where a lot of this takes place. If we're going to be loyal to Christ, loyal to the morality that God has set forth for us, we're going to have to first purpose in our heart. We're going to have to make that decision within our minds, within our hearts, that I'm not going to defile myself. I'm not going to defile myself with the doctrines of this world, the false teachings, the denominationalism of this world, and on we could go with the doctrine that God has set forth. I'm not going to defile myself with all of those compromises and false doctrines that are out there. I'm going to purpose in my heart to be faithful to God. And then when we come over to these moral areas and the moral aspect, that we're going to purpose in our hearts, I'm going to remain faithful to God. I don't care if the people of the world ridicule us. I don't care if they are living in such a way that it appeals to the flesh and the things of the world. I'm going to live in such a way that is pleasing to God. And that's all that really matters in life. It doesn't matter if I am by the world popular, as long as I'm popular with God. It doesn't matter if the world thinks of beauty in a certain way, as long as I'm beautiful with God and in His eyes. It doesn't matter if the clothing that the world wears and the actions that the world takes are in one area, as long as I'm going to be faithful to God in my actions and in the clothing that I wear, and I'm going to wear those things and act such a way as to show forth godliness within my life. We purpose in our heart. Now Daniel, going back to him, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they could have gone up there. Let's face it, they were in Babylon, hundreds of miles away from Jerusalem. Nobody will know about it. Anyway, we're in the king's servitude at this point in time, and he's telling us to eat these things, to drink these items. Surely you don't expect us not to do that, not to engage it. Everybody else in here is doing it. All of the other eunuchs are engaged in these things. We're going to have to as well. to use the expression that some have used, they just have to. They don't have any choice in the matter. But instead, he purposed in his heart, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be faithful to God. Can you imagine when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, here's this great image that the king has made. And the command goes out, at the sounding of the instruments, everyone must bow down and worship that image. And if you don't, you're going to be thrown into the fiery furnace. Your life is on the line. The instruments sound, what do? A lot of Christians would kind of look around and down they would go. Because they're not loyal to God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood there. They refused to bow down to that image. The king calls them in. Aren't you going to bow down? No, we're not. Don't you know you're going to be put in the fiery furnace? You're going to die? It doesn't matter. God can save us if He wants to. But even if He doesn't, we're not going to bow down. We're not going to succumb to what the popular view is. Everyone else bowing down. We're not going to submit ourselves to you, King, in this ungodly command that you've made. We are going to remain loyal to God. And it infuriated the king. Heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it normally is. So they do. Now then, throw these 3 men into it. They do. And they're not even harmed because God does save them. But their statement to Nebuchadnezzar is what's important. Nebuchadnezzar, it does not matter whether God saves us or not. Doesn't matter what you do or not. We will remain loyal to God. And it's wrong, it is sinful to bow down to that image, and so we will not do it. We go out into a world, and we live in the world, but we're not to be of the world. We are to shed forth Christianity within our lives. And when we start conforming ourselves to the world, everybody's doing it. This is the way everybody dresses. This is the way everybody talks. They expect it from us. And a little white lies, those aren't all that bad anyway. And we can rationalize anything and everything. We are no longer being loyal to God, to the morality that He set forth. We're no longer being loyal to His doctrine that He set forth. And we've gone to be on Satan's side instead of God's side. God calls us to loyalty, to be loyal at all times to Him. In everything that we do, in every act that we live, in our showing ourselves before a lost and dying world. We are to be lights into the world. A world that's in darkness and needs the light of God's will. And we need to be out preaching and teaching that message that is the only saving message of mankind. And yes, people might ridicule. They might object. They might fight against it. But the question is, who are we going to be loyal to? Have we, as Daniel, purposed in our heart that we'll not defile ourselves with the things of this world? Or do we succumb to them? Now, if you're not a Christian, you can't purpose in your heart not to defile yourself. You are defiled. And you need to obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. You need to become a Christian. If you have become a Christian, Be you gone back into the world. You've defiled yourself again. And why not repent of your sins and come back into Him and once again be faithful to Him? Be loyal to Christ. Be loyal to His will. Be loyal to the way in which we're supposed to live, as far as what God sets forth and not the world. If you need to come this afternoon, we would encourage you to come as we stand and sing the invitation song.